Partnership for Maternal, Newborn, and Child Health. Again, welcome. We're really happy to have you online and joining this session. Before we get started to the presentations, we'd like to just go over a few ground rules. If you've joined a little late, Amy mentioned at the beginning of our session that all participants will be in listen-only mode. You are welcome to submit questions at any time during the presentation by typing them in the chat feature that's located on your screen. Questions will be addressed during our Q&A session that Amy will help to moderate. And just as a reminder, we are recording today's session, so you can share that with others who were not able to join or listen to the presentation and Q&A at a later date. So today's webinar provides an overview of the small grants mechanism and also gives applicants an opportunity to ask questions and seek clarification on the RFP and the proposal template and the annexes that are required. So we're happy to have you join and to review the overview, listen to the overview, and ask any questions that you may have. So let's get started. As background, in recognition of the role of civil society in efforts to improve health outcomes, to accelerate progress towards achieving the SDGs through their advocacy for improved services, equity, and access, and through their role in keeping all actors accountable for delivering on their promises, in November 2017, at the GFF Investors Group meeting, the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn, and Child Health, PMNCH, and the GFF Secretariat each pledged $500,000 and $300,000 respectively towards supporting civil society engagement in the GFF, as well as other women, children, and adolescent health initiatives. A year later, in November 2018, MSH was identified as the host organization, and in this role, we will be responsible for dispersing, managing, and overseeing grants to a range of country-level civil society coalitions and networks. And as you may have seen last week on the 6th of February, the call for proposals was released to invite coalitions or networks of CSOs to apply to the small grants mechanism in an effort to better coordinate civil society to engage in national processes and programs with particular focus on the GFF. This slide presents a general overview of the small grants mechanism. Grant applications can be submitted for up to US $70,000, and they should cover activities to be implemented over a 12-month period. The period of implementation will be from April of this year through March of 2020. As you may have seen in the RFP, the application deadline is March 5th at 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time, and we expect to award approximately 8 to 9 grants depending on the individual grant amounts. In terms of what the overall objectives of the small grants mechanism, there are 3 overall objectives. The small grants program, in essence, provides small grants to support better coordinated civil society efforts to engage in national and subnational structures, processes, and programs to improve women, children, adolescent health outcomes through the following 3 objectives. So the first one aims to strengthen civil society coalitions so that they can build consensus, identify shared priorities, increase or perhaps align resources and actions in an effort to present a coordinated civil society perspective and to be able to meaningfully engage in both national and subnational processes. The second objective of the small grants mechanism is to support the implementation of women, children, adolescent health advocacy and accountability activities, which could perhaps and potentially focus on one or more of the Every Woman, Every Child focus themes, and with the ultimate aim of helping to support the achievement of national women's, children, adolescent health targets, with this particular emphasis and perhaps particular focus on supporting the mobilization of domestic resources. The final objective of the small grants mechanism is to support the development of coalitions, skills, and advocacy, in particular looking at supporting how advocates and coalitions together can support domestic resource mobilization, and also a focus on accountability. The applications and the grantees of the small grants mechanism will be expected to address one or more of these objectives through their proposed activities. In terms of the eligibility criteria, what's outlined in our request for proposals and in the proposal template is that the small grants mechanism will support coalitions and networks of civil society rather than individual organizations, and with the view towards enhancing alignments, coordinated advocacy, shared learning, and improved communication between civil society and other constituencies. For example, representatives of government, parliament, the private sector, UN agencies, and others as well. The program recognizes that coalitions often take different shapes, and we don't, the mechanism does not mandate a particular structure for the coalition. However, it does encourage grant applicants to build on or strengthen existing coalitions rather than creating new ones. For each application, a lead organization will need to be identified. That lead organization must be a legally registered NGO or nonprofit in the country of work. They need to have been audited by an external entity for the last 2 consecutive years, must have a dedicated bank account to be able to receive funds, and they must have some convening expertise and bringing together partners from a range of constituency groups. For example, maternal newborn child health, sexual reproductive health, WASH, including, for example, a range of civil society groups, health professional associations, community groups, among others. Here you see a list of the eligible countries from which applicants can apply. We are happy to have applicants submit proposals from these 31 eligible countries. As you've seen on this slide, we have identified the countries currently receiving GFF support. These are identified in black, and those marked in orange are countries not currently receiving GFF support. And this list of eligible countries is not any indication that additional countries are in any negotiations or lined up next for GFF support. A note that if applicants are applying from one of the countries receiving GFF support, they must be able to show demonstrated engagement with the GFF multi-stakeholder country platform and or the GFF focal points. I can't tell if Khadi is on the line, but Khadi from the who represents the PMNCH Secretariat can also elaborate on how these countries were identified for the small grants mechanism. Khadi on the line, can she be unmuted? Okay. So let's move on to the requirements for the grant proposal. The small grants mechanism aims to encourage coordination and alignment amongst diverse stakeholders and to support advancing common goals for the health and well-being of of women, children, and adolescents. So the RFP, as you may have all seen, outlines the following requirements to include in the proposals. The first requirement is that the applications and applicants propose to meet one or more of the 3 small grant mechanism objectives. So we described those earlier in our slides. So the applications have to respond to one or more of those 3 objectives. The second requirement is that the proposals demonstrate and health and well-being, how to engage and support the involvement of vulnerable groups, including youth and other vulnerable groups, as well as grassroots and civil society, CSOs, civil society organizations. Applications and also need to provide evidence on a use of a gender transformative approach, so looking at how human rights, gender equality, and equity, looking at those considerations in those proposals that are submitted for the small grants mechanism. There needs to be a plan for sustainability of the project. So where grantees can identify and demonstrate, for example, additional cash and in-kind resources of other partners that may be leveraged for greater common impact, and to indicate a plan for leveraging the small grant to secure additional resources for other donors. We really think, and have envisioned these small grants to be catalytic, to be able to leverage other resources, in-kind support, and to use this funding to support or spur additional funding from other donors. And finally, there should be explicit efforts to link these small grants with regional advocacy initiatives, country-level initiatives, and cross-constituency efforts. So looking at partnering and engaging with members of the media, members of parliament, the private sector, wherever possible, and also to engage in multi-stakeholder, engage in other sort of cross-cutting initiatives, looking at advocacy platforms related to global health initiatives that are active in the country of work, for example, Gavi, Global Fund, FP 2020, UHC 2030, among others. So when we look at the evaluation of the proposals, there will be a 3-step process to facilitate a fair and comprehensive review of the grant proposals, as well as identifying what the decision-making process is for how these grants will be awarded. The first step is an eligibility screening, which as MSH, as a host organization, will review all grant applications and to see whether they meet the organizational and grant proposal requirements. We will then remove those that don't meet these requirements from the overall application pool. The second step is that the host organization will then review and the remaining grant proposals and score them according to the established organizational and grant proposal criteria. This second screening round will also consider portfolio balance, so trying to ensure geographic diversity, looking at countries at various stages of the GFF process, the ability to contribute to a learning agenda, looking at thematic diversity, and looking at whether applications are focused on achieving Objective 1 versus Objective 2 versus Objective 3, so ensuring a balance amongst the 3 objectives. So while scoring is important, it may not be the case that those that are scored highest are chosen, since we are looking to ensure geographical spread and other considerations to really ensure a well-formed grant scheme. So subsequently, the host organization, MSH, will then recommend a short list of potential grant proposals to a small grants reference group, and then also suggests recommended grant amounts for each of these proposals. And the small grants reference group will then conduct a review. They will review these shortlisted proposals and recommend grant amounts. The members of the reference group will provide recommendations to the host organization about the final grant awardees, and then the host organization will make final decisions about the grant awardees, taking into consideration the recommendations of the reference group. There may be, just to also note that the host organization has the right to propose changes to proposals with a view to build on existing work, promote synergies, and ensure that progress and results can be monitored appropriately. The host organization may also decide that a recipient organization should build in time to further refine their proposal. For example, by consulting with their coalition members or to further develop their monitoring plan. So as such, grants may be potentially awarded on a rolling basis. So this concludes the presentation session of our webinar. We hope we were able to provide a very quick and dirty kind of overview of the small grants mechanism. I understand you may have many questions that you'd like to raise to MSH as well as to PMNCH, and we will work on, now move to the Q&A session, and I will turn it over to Amy if she is able to unmute herself and go through all the questions that came in during the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Shafia, and thanks to all of you who are participating on the call. Before we, I have been monitoring your questions in the chat box, so if there are others who have questions, please go ahead and type them in now. We've got plenty of time on the call to work through addressing them. I do want to just go back briefly. I'm sorry, we were having some challenges with the mute function, so there was a little bit of background noise, and then we weren't able to have Kadi come in from the partnership. So I just wanted to ask Kadi to speak briefly about the country selection, since we weren't able to have her do so during the presentation. Jude, can you please make sure that Kadi's line is open? It's Toure K. And Shafia, could you go back to the country slide, please?
Yeah, we'll go back. Hopefully. Oops.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Kadi.
Okay, and sorry I couldn't jump in earlier. So just to know, civil society engagement in national planning processes is something that CMNC prioritizes and dear to its heart. And we understand that there are 27 GFF countries who wanted to open up the possibility to additional countries where there are ongoing processes related to the 6 priority areas under Every Woman, Every Child, to also apply for these resources, noting that they do have ongoing planning processes as well. And so we cross-check the GFF countries with the existing countries that have processes around these, which are the key countries, and we only in 4 countries that could apply for it. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay, thanks, Kadi. Thanks for coming in and giving a little bit of background on the countries. So the process now for the Q&A is that I'll actually be reading the questions in the interest of time, and we'll try to address them the best we can. Shafia, Kadi, and I are all here to help respond to you, and we're going to keep the rest of the lines on mute, so that there's not so much background noise while we're talking. So the first set of questions that we received are related to lots of questions, and we knew there would be, related to the eligibility of groups to apply. So the first question was one about PMNCH, whether current grantees of PMNCH are eligible to apply for this grant process. Kadi, are there any concerns about existing grants of PMNCH applying?
No, not at all.
Okay, so that's great. An easy one to start with. Then there are a number of questions from organizations that are networks, either a large network applying for multi-country grants or umbrella organizations of health institutions, and whether those count as networks of civil society organizations. My understanding in terms of one large network applying for multi-country grants is that it may not be exactly what we're looking for. But Kadi, do you have a preference? It's a good question. It's one we hadn't considered. Do you have a particular position from PMNCH on one large network applying for multi-country grants? I think we're hoping to really strengthen civil society coalitions in a specific country.
So that's right. That's something that we hadn't considered. So there is no written note that says that that's not possible. However, the proposals need to consider a couple of things. One, the specificity of the national context and response to that, and two, the factoring in of local organizations and of youth organizations within that. So if it is felt that a multi-country grant can address that, then by all means, I think you can submit it. But it might be easier to be specific and answer all of the requirements if the grant is submitted by country.
Right, so I see that people are having a little bit of a hard time hearing Kadi. She's also sounds a little bit in the distance. She was saying that's okay. There can be a multi-country network doing the application as long as they could truly demonstrate that they had met the requirements, for example, engagement of youth organizations and community-based organizations, et cetera, in the network. So in that case, in terms of truly demonstrating the coalition work at the country level, it may be easier to just apply country by country rather than in a multi-country grant, but we won't rule it out. For the question about whether an umbrella body of health institutions, coordinating activities would suffice, I think it's important to look at the requirements of the RFP that we are supporting coalitions of civil society organizations, those who are likely doing advocacy, if you look at the requirements around the key issues of every woman, every child, and of the global financing facility. So I think it would depend whether the staff in those health facilities are also operating as sort of active civil society advocacy organizations rather than as health service providers. If you have particular questions, we can also follow up with you specifically on your presentation. The email address where you can send your specific questions and communicate with us is on your screen now, gffcsogrants@msh, because I understand you're having a hard time hearing from Kadi, so I'll try to amplify her questions, her answers. And Kadi, if you have headphones or a way to be closer to the speaker, that would be great. Also, some questions about registration of a global coalition, and then having a secretariat office operating in the country. I think as Shafia highlighted, the requirements of the proposal indicate, that active presence, the registration, it could be of a secretariat office in the country. You're not precluded from applying if you can show that you are doing the in-country based active coordination of a coalition. There are a couple of questions, yes, and I do want to reiterate, it must be a coalition. There's a question, this is a very important point, about individual organizations applying as opposed to a coalition. So this is for support of coalitions who are doing this advocacy. In the paperwork, in the RFP, you will see that there must be a lead organization, one organization who applies on behalf of the others and acts as the fiscal sponsor, manages the grant relationship. But there must be a coalition in order to apply, and you will see the requirements for those coalitions in the RFP. There's not a limit on the number of coalitions that can submit proposals per country. Of course, ideally, we would hope that the civil society organizations in a country would be working together, but of course you may have coalitions in different geographic areas or coalitions with different areas of focus. So there's not a limit. We, as you've seen, have a limited number of overall grants that we can make. So as part of the screening process by the review and small grants reference group, certainly there would be some reviewing and discussing of sort of which coalitions in country may be best positioned to undertake the advocacy. But for now, in the application process, there is no limit. There are some questions about the overhead and administrative costs. They are indicated in both the budget template and in the RFP itself. We've provided a detailed budget template for your use to fill in the different areas of the budget, including staffing, activity costs. There is a 15% limit on the overhead, as indicated in the documentation and in the budget template, and they cannot. The indirect costs cannot exceed 15%. There's also some specific information in the RFP about if that lead organization for the coalition intends to do any subgranting. For example, you're the lead organization and you want to give $10,000 of the grant to the youth members of your coalition so that they can do a specific opportunity. If you're going to propose any subgranting like that, there are some specific requirements that we have in the proposal that you must follow. And in that case, the overhead, the 15% overhead, can only be charged on your lead organization costs. It cannot be charged on those funds that you would be proposing to transfer to other coalition members. If you have specific questions on that while you're preparing the proposal, please reach out to us at the GFF CSO Grants email address so that we can help you with that. Those may be some specific questions for you. Absolutely not. There's no requirement that applicant organizations have to have a working relationship with Management Sciences for Health in country. MSH, Management Sciences for Health's role in this process is serving as the host organization for the RFP. This is to ensure, obviously, some transparency in the process, to not have the organizations that are the sort of the donors or the leads of the work being advocated around, also making decisions about who gets the funds. We're sort of here to be an impartial third party. So no, there's no requirement that you have any working relationship with MSH in a particular country, but we do hope that you will engage with us here as the host organization so that we can help you with the proposals, and we'll be responsible as it lays out in the paperwork for doing the screening, the ranking, review, also for doing the financial monitoring, et cetera, of the grants and making the actual transfer of the funds to the selected grantees. There are other questions about a US-based nonprofit that does a lot of work in eligible countries, and can we apply based on our work in those countries from the US? Kadi, I'll let you come in there, but I mean, you absolutely on the question of, you know, do we have to have our Tanzanian civil society groups, you know, involved in the application? It's crucial that we're supporting an in-country coalition. Kadi, do you have, and hopefully we'll be able to hear you.
Can you hear me any better now?
That's much better. A particular response on US-based organizations?
Yeah, so the hope would be that we're supporting local organizations. So if the US-based organization has a national organization in one of those countries and wants to apply that way, then that's perfectly fine. But applying for supporting a program being based outside of the country, I think is a bit difficult to rationalize in this case.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kadi. And yes, we can hear you. We can hear you much better now. Can national and international organizations apply as long as they're registered in a country? Yes, I think as Kadi was just laying out, as long as it's, you know, an organization that is registered in the country and helping, leading or engaged in that coalition organizing and advocacy, then that is fine. Important though that they not be, as she's saying, just an international organization, you know, based somewhere else applying for work in the country that you're applying for. There's some questions about the timelines. Shafia, could you back up again to the slide just so we can review the timelines? As you'll have seen, the grant proposals are due by the 5th of March. The committee will do its best to review and rank the proposals as quickly as possible. We are targeting having the grants begin to be made in April of 2019, and they are for 12 months of implementation. So that is that's the timeline. All applications due by 5th of March. Again, as you're preparing your proposals, feel free to, you know, to reach out to us. Is there any compliance needed with the Mexico City policy? That's a good question. This is not US government funding, so the answer is no. The Mexico City policy, the Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance policy, is a policy that only applies to US government health funding that is going to foreign or NGOs based outside of the US. So no, that is not relevant to this call. There are a continuing number of questions about sort of large networks with multiple members in different countries. You know, if you have a specific question about your the setup of your network, the registration of your network in a country, the, you know, makeup of the proposed network, please feel free to reach out to us, because that it may just be easier for us to review your specific situation case by case and confirm to you that you are indeed eligible. There is a question here also about, and we are planning to do this, I should have said so at the beginning, is there a possibility to compile the questions and provide the answers in writing? We will. We are also recording this webinar, and it will be posted for sharing on that same page on the MSH website. that you were directed to find the RFP. And we will, yes, because it's been difficult to hear some of the responses, we can provide the answers to some of these most frequently asked questions on the web page as well.
Amy, can I interject with a comment? We also would like to note that there is a complementary granting mechanism that is also being launched very soon. That grant mechanism is being coordinated by PAI, Population Action International, that also has, as I mentioned, complementary objectives, but has a slightly different focus, and that information will be forthcoming very soon. So we'll be able to share that with our networks and our partners as well. So that's something else for individuals and coalitions and organizations to look out for. That should be forthcoming.
Great. So thanks, Shafia. So there is a good question here about whether the network needs to be formally registered, whether the coalition you're applying for must have legal status. And it is indicated in the RFP that no. We understand that many of us are part of civil society coalitions that aren't registered as a separate nonprofit organization, right? So the lead organization, the civil society organization submitting the application, has to be legally registered, has to provide us with their registration documents and 2 years of audited financial reports, but the coalition itself does not have to be a separate legal entity. We know that usually the coalition won't be a separate legal entity. So we will also try again in that frequently asked questions to address many of these concerns that are coming up about, international NGOs not registered as a civil society organization in country. But Kadi, I think people had a hard time hearing you before. Can you just come back in briefly on, these are international organizations, international NGOs who may be helping to support civil society organizations in the country, and is that acceptable?
Yes, so thank you, Amy, and apologies about my headset. There is a need for the organization that applies to have legal representation be registered in a country. So again, international organizations that have a national headquarter or a national office that would like to, that leads on some consultative coalition, building a coordination process in country can apply. But however, an international organization without national representation cannot.
Great, thank you.
And just to jump in, I think, in principle, all of the requirements that are set out in the RFP have to be met. So you really need to look through those requirements and really understand, does your organization, whether it's an international NGO or a national NGO, do you meet those requirements? So that's the basic set of indicators that you need to review to consider whether this, you qualify for this. So I think that's something, if you have still questions about, feel free to, as Amy said, reach out to us and we can talk through your specific situation with you.
Right, and I see that Susanna Dennis from PAI has also shared in the chat box some of the information about the GFF Civil Society Organization Resource and Engagement Hub that Shafia was referring to. So she's provided some additional information there, and they will let you know. They will also be issuing RFPs for slightly smaller grant awards in the coming months. So if your coalition is not successful in being awarded one of these small grants in this current mechanism that we're talking about, or if you don't meet the requirements of this small grants mechanism, perhaps you'll be able to consider applying for the GFF CSO Hub that's being led by PAI, and we'll make sure that there is a link to the information about their work also on our website. I see there's a question also about what we meant on this slide that's on the screen about the number of grants. What this means is that we have an overall pot of funding that can be allocated with these grants, and we are accepting proposals for up to $70,000. So if all proposals came in at $70,000, we would only be able to provide a total of 8 or 9 awards under this RFP. Some of the proposals, though, we do expect will be for less. You should, do the budget and apply only for the budget that you truly require and can administer for your coalition. So, for example, if we have some grants that are $50,000 and some that are $70,000, et cetera, then we may be able to make a slightly larger number of grants. So that just refers to the overall funding envelope that we have available. There are some specific questions about audits and the financial reports that are required. Yes, 2016 and 2017 audit reports can be accepted. Please refer to what it says in the RFP documentation about the supporting documents that need to be submitted as appendices. There's also a question. Go ahead, Shafia.
Yeah, there's a question about the proposal and how it needs to be submitted. When we issued the RFP, there was the RFP and there were 3 associated submission forms that constitute the proposal documents. So there's a proposal form that needs to be completed and submitted to the host organization. And then there were 2 annexes. One was a budget and one was an activity timeline. So all 3 of those documents, the proposal form and the 2 annexes, the budget and the activity timeline, those 3 documents need to be submitted. There are also some, if you look through the proposal document, there are additional requirements that need to be submitted as evidence of the proposed, in support of your application. So, for example, your registration documents, your copy of your audited statement, so those need to be submitted as supplementary documents. If you have additional questions about the requirements, as I said, feel free to email us and we can help you through the process.
Yeah, and the template to be used for writing the proposal is the attachment. There are 2 main documents that were made available, the request for proposals and the proposal template. It looks like a table. It has 2 columns with questions on the left and empty boxes on the right where you can fill in your answers to the questions. If you have any questions about, filling in the template, using the budget form, the various documentation that Shafia is talking about, please email us and we will put, again, let me pull the link from the MSH website where you can access all of this small grants information, and I will put it in the chat box. I think we've gone through most of the questions on the list. Some of the other specific questions, again, if you have a specific question, you can send them to our email. Yes, the audits would be from the lead organization. If you review what it says in the RFP, the lead organization is the one that is responsible for being the financial manager, right, for this funding. That lead organization, that lead civil society organization will be responsible for managing and reporting on the use of the grant funds. And therefore, we need to do our due diligence to ensure the financial health and appropriate financial management systems being in place for that lead organization. That's why we're requesting that the lead organizations provide us with the audited financials as well as a number of letters of support so that we can ensure that they are well-established organizations that can manage the amount of grant funds that would be provided if they were awarded a grant under this small grants mechanism. Any other questions? I will share the small grants mechanism link in just a moment. I do also want to remind You all, I'm sure you've joined this call today because you speak English or you're comfortable in conducting your work in English, but we are also hosting a webinar tomorrow in French. So if you have partners or members of your coalition or others in your global network that are in Francophone countries, we hope that that you'll encourage them to join us tomorrow. The link is available in the emails. There's a question about a single community-based organization that doesn't want to merge with other organizations to implement. So again, we're not talking about a merger of NGOs. We're simply talking about working in coalition with other civil society groups in the country. So we hope that you would be we cannot accept a proposal from one organization to simply support that organization's work. It has to be a coalition. I think we've been very clear about that in the documentation as well as on this call today. Shafia,
someone asked about how many organizations should be in a coalition. I mean, that's something that the coalition establishes as, based on its membership and the needs and the country context. I know we cannot specify how many organizations should be in a coalition. That's really something for the civil society to determine as they, based on what their needs and priorities of the coalition are. So that's not something we can specify as a host organization or as a donor entity. I think we also made the point during the presentation is that while our preference is to support existing and up and running coalitions, established coalitions, there is a possibility of using this small grants mechanism to start a coalition, to establish a coalition if there is no other coalition that currently exists on women's, children's, and adolescents' health. So that's something that can also be considered. But I think the application needs to make a strong case as to why a new coalition should be established to respond to these objectives. Let's see, are there any other questions that are coming? I think we've covered most of them. Someone just recently said to explain what a coalition means. I think what we mean by a coalition is basically CSO organizations coming together around a common agenda, a common purpose with common objectives for advocacy and accountability for women's and children's health. So I think that's broadly what we define as a coalition. They can be cross-constituency groups. It can be focused on different health issues, supporting women's, children's, and adolescents' health. So I think broadly that's what we would consider a coalition.
Right. There was a question before, I think, that I may have skipped over, that was whether these are advocacy grants or service delivery grants. Yes, this is very much an advocacy focused support opportunity. So I think if you review what we are looking for in the proposal in terms of activities, that should be clear. There's also a question about engagement. It's a good question, engagement with the sort of in-country global financing facility, country level activities. And yes, if you are in a country that's laid out in the RFP as one of the requirements, if you are applying as a coalition in one of the countries that is a current GFF country, you are required in the RFP, it's listed out, to detail your engagement and active advocacy and engagement with those existing GFF country level activities. So there are a few countries on the list that are not GFF countries. So of course this only applies in the GFF countries. Kadi, do you want to say any more about that, those specific platforms, what we would be interested in seeing engagement in?
So I think Amy's laid it out very well. In a number of countries, we've seen past grants look at strengthening coalitions, and those coalitions have developed work plans or action plans that they've sought to implement. And those have included activities ranging from advocacy to accountability to service delivery. But in terms of the grants that would actually cover activity implementation rather than sort of coalition building, then those would obviously be around advocacy. And for the countries that aren't part of the GFF countries, those are countries that have seen coalition building activities as well around particular issues like quality of care, that have also developed joint work plans, including some activities like advocacy and accountability. And grants are really meant to be catalytic and to cover gaps where they exist rather than, and to try to incite sustainability rather than replacing bulk of programs such as service delivery. So they do focus either on strengthening the coalitions or on catalytic advocacy and accountability efforts. One thing that has been noted is that these grants can also be used around capacity building.
Thanks, Kadi.
There's a question from one participant that asked to clarify if 8 to 9 is the number of total grants for all of the countries. And yes, as I think Amy mentioned, the total number will depend on what the actual amounts of the proposals will be and which ones will be selected for the actual awards. So it's a range that will really depend on what kind of proposals we will receive and how much amounts those proposals will will be supported.
Right, and I saw some questions about the subgranting. So as I indicated, if the host organization, the lead organization, is planning to give any of the funding it receives to some of the other members of the coalition, then yes, that's a subgranting process that the lead organization is responsible for implementing. It's not a requirement, right? There could be different models. A coalition lead organization could receive the funding and cover all the costs for the coalition itself, to make it administratively easier. But if that coalition has different member groups or subnational chapters within it, and you would like to provide some of the funding to them to implement specific advocacy activities, for example, in their area of the country, that's allowed. You will see in the request for proposals and in the template that there are requirements that you indicate to us how you would manage that subgranting, how you would ensure that those funds are appropriately expended. But it's certainly allowed, but you need to provide the information in your proposal about how you would do that. And to be clear, there's a question on the objectives. Yes, you can absolutely apply for just one of the objectives. Shafia, can you go to that slide? For objective 1, objective 2, objective 3, or you can indicate, there's a place on the template where you can circle and say which objectives you're going to work on, or you can indicate that you would like to apply to work in more than one of those areas, but doing just one of the objectives is absolutely fine. And there is a question about whether within a consortium you could subgrant on a competitive basis. I mean, again, you'll be required in the proposal to indicate how you would be, as the lead organization, managing what process you would use to give to subgrant any money to the other members of your coalition. So I suppose if you wanted to do that on a competitive basis, there's nothing in the RFP that precludes you from doing so. You'd need to spell it out for us how you're going to do that, and how you will manage it and ensure the appropriate use of the funding. And yes, you know, within the coalitions that there's a question about a cross-country coalition. I mean, I think Kadi already responded to a point about, you know, if you're a multi-country network, I mean, that it may be easier to apply as a country-level coalition in a specific country. Kadi, I don't think people could hear you very well before. Do you want to come in on this question before we wrap up of sort of cross-country coalitions or multi-country coalitions? I don't think they heard your answer before.
Yes, just to note, so there's no statute preventing that type of application, but when one looks at the various technical requirements in terms of the engagement of local organizations, the promotion of youth within some of these organizations, and the hope specificity that you would want to get out of these proposals, it might be advantageous to submit nationally focused proposals. But if anyone thinks that they can do all of those the same justice through a cross-country proposal, then there's nothing preventing that.
Great. So we're coming to the end of our time. We will reconfirm in the, so I've sent the link to the page on the MSH website where we have the all of the documents, the request for proposals, the template, the various appendices that need to be attached. We will also add some information about the PAI GFF Hub and provide access to the recordings of the webinars, as well as perhaps the sort of frequently asked questions, responses in writing to some of the common themes of questions that have come up on this webinar. It's been very helpful to hear what was clear and what was unclear, and we'll do our best to respond to all of those questions. Again, Shafia, if you can go to the last slide, a reminder of our email address here at MSH that you can write to at any time, gffcsogrants@msh.org. That both Shafia and I are monitoring that email daily and already responding to specific questions that have come in from others. So if we didn't answer your question in enough detail on this webinar, please do feel free to send us a message so that we can help you as you prepare your proposals. We're so delighted to see the broad interest from so many people, even just as exemplified on how many of you have made the time to join the webinar today. So we look forward to receiving a really excellent group of submissions and to making awards to really support some impactful civil society work around women, children's, and adolescents' health at the country level. I want to thank Shafia, thank the folks on the MSH team who've provided technical support today, and thank Kadi from the Partnership for Maternal Newborn Child Health for being here to respond to these questions. We've reached the end of the webinar, so thank you all for participating, and we will send out links on the GFF civil society group listserv, the other places that we use to disseminate the RFP to make sure that you know when some of these frequently asked questions and other resources are available. Please do keep checking the MSH website. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Shafia.